community. Us in Britain, we don't know what's going on in their community because the two communities do not mix. They're two communities that are completely enmity with each other. We don't know what's going on in their community, and they don't know what's going on in our community. The thing is, in our community, we're living our lives peacefully, bringing our families up, just living normal day-to-day Western civilized lives. Their community, you've got radical fundamentals that want to convert our whole country into their way of life because they think their way of life is supreme. So our community knows nothing about that community, and then we've got our leaders coming out telling our people that these aren't Muslims that are doing these things, that it's nothing to do with Islam. So if you're telling the population that these are just terrorists, they're just criminals, they're nothing to do with Islam, they're not Muslim, most of the population are just listening to that and accepting it. It's propaganda. We're being indoctrinated and programmed to think the way that our leaders want us to think. And they don't want us to address this issue, you know, and the longer it's not addressed, the bigger the beast gets. And the bigger the beast gets, the more worrying, the more frightening that beast becomes, you know, and that beast is now living in my land, living in my country. You know, that beast has threatened my life. I've now got people wanting to kill me, you know. I'm homeless. I'm you know, that my whole situation's completely, well, I've lost my whole life, literally. I've lost my whole life because of the Islamic Kingdom and what they're doing within my country, you know, so... Yeah, but getting back to the point, no, people don't know. They don't care. They're just getting on with their lives. But they would have cared if like, a couple of hundred young people would have had their lives taken away from them that night.
You really think they would have cared? Or they're just gone, or go back to sleep? Is there any kind of organized resistance going on in Britain? We have it here in this country. Not mainstream, but with things like Vigilant Freedom and the MAP Sharia project, we're beginning to see some organized, even though it's grassroots and out of the mainstream. We're beginning to see this kind of organized resistance, an attempt at trying to pull data together and information together in order to make an argument to Americans that this political Islam, this Islamic ideology is a threat. Are there any kind of organizational resistance going on in England? I know there's some going on in Europe.
Yeah, you've actually got a political party, but the political party, the main parties class them as extreme, racist, far right. It's the British National Party, and they are the only voice of reason out there.
That's right, because BNP has some alarming material on their website.
Yeah, since I knew nothing about politics before my whole world changed, and once it changed, you then start looking to see who is there out there that sees what I see and that's living what I'm living. And I started seeing and reading stuff from the BNP, but the main parties are just crushing the BNP because of their original roots. But they're the only people out there. They're the only organisation I see out there that are trying to resist what's actually... Well, they're trying to resist the Islamification of Great Britain, because the Islamification of Great Britain is actually happening as we're speaking. You know, the NHS, our NHS system is just full of Muslim doctors and nurses, you know. That's not to say they're all Muslim extremists and terrorists, but if they're good Muslims, then they are to follow the way Muhammad taught them to follow. Muhammad taught them to fight jihad against the infidels. So if they're good Muslims, that's what they should be doing. So when we look at these people and say, yeah, they're good Muslims, are they good Muslims because they're following the ways of Muhammad, which is jihad against the infidel, you know? But our health system, our NHS, is held up by Muslim doctors from Middle Eastern countries.
You know, that's really frightening. That is absolutely frightening, because as a patient, oftentimes a patient is not in a position to do any resisting or any questioning of a doctor's ideology.
Exactly.
You know, sometimes you're unconscious, for example. We have a lot of Muslim doctors here who do colonoscopies. I know this sounds terrible, but it's true. I mean, if you have to have the colonoscopy, like the health insurance companies here want you to have one at age 50, almost all the doctors are Muslim.
Yeah.
That perform that particular procedure, which is not to say they are going necessarily to do anything. but during that procedure, one is unconscious. And,
yeah.
you know, there's that problem. I'd like to ask you a couple of questions about what's going on in Luton. Is that how you say it?
Yeah, I'll come to that one. Before I just finish that, there's actually an article on my site. I received a comment from someone this morning proclaiming to be a Muslim, and it talks about their infiltration of our health system. And there's actually an Iraqi, there was an incident in Iraq where a doctor was actually killing patients because of his religious beliefs. And there's an article on my site. It's my top article, which actually shows the detailed plan for the NHS, Muslims in the NHS.
Ah, I see it. I've got my computer on, of course. I see it. How many?
So that's there for people to have a little look at.
Wow.
But Luton is, there's a civil war on the streets of Luton. You know, it's just not an open civil war where people are running down the road with guns. You know, this is stuff that's going on under the surface, with the Islamic kingdom just growing. It's growing, financed from mainly drugs, heroin and crack cocaine. You know, the heroin on the streets of Luton all comes from the poppy fields of Afghanistan. You know. It's being used as a weapon of war against us. The streets are awash with like heroin and crack cocaine 24 hours a day. There is a paramilitary army of young Muslim men on the streets of Luton that are conducting low-level civil war that's easily classed as just criminality. And then beyond that, you've got the religious extremists, the 7/7 bombers. All the links that are traced back to Luton is just horrendous, you know, and that's where I live. That's my community. In that community, you've got hundreds and hundreds of young Muslim men that are believers in the ideals of jihad, you know. And in my community, you've got no one. You've got no one that's like really aware of the situation that's going on under the surface, or aware of the situation that's going on next door to the community to where you're living, and it's terrible. It's terrible.
Let me ask you something. You said that you mentioned several times in your blog and today about the the drug trade in Luton.
Yeah.
Okay? Now. I thought, are these Muslims doing this drug trade? Are they using the drugs or selling them to the infidels? Or,
Just
drugs
selling.
are against, sorry, what?
Selling it to the infidel.
So they're not using it themselves?
You obviously, you do get the ones that use it themselves, but no, they've got a highly organised operation on the streets of Luton and Dunstable, highly organised. They own all the taxi companies, apart from, you've obviously got the couple of non-Muslim companies, but the majority, 90-95% of all taxi companies are all Muslim. So you've got hundreds of taxis on the streets of Luton every single day, all in communication, all with satellite navigation. And what they do is they work as the eyes and ears for the criminal element. So then the criminal element then come in and then they just pump their drugs. They just pump their drugs out into my community, destroying my friends' lives. I've had friends that are dead now because of the drugs coming in from the Pakistani Muslim community of Luton. I've got friends that are dead. There are others whose lives are ruined, and the next generation are coming up, and they are going to be affected by all of this because they start out on softer drugs and end up on the harder drugs. Mm-hmm. Who are the ones selling the harder drugs? It's the Muslims. They then become what I would class as Muslim slaves, paying them 20, 40, 60, up to a few £100 a day for their drug habit.
Well, here's a little factoid for the audience. Right after 9/11, there was information released in the D.C. area about al-Qaeda ties to marketing drugs on the streets of Washington, primarily crack cocaine. And this sounds absolutely unbelievable, but believe it or not, the drug usage dropped phenomenally when that information was released. And of course, it's back up to where it was before now. But I would say for about 6 months following 9/11, actually, people that had been using crack cocaine, when they realized that they were funding al-Qaeda, stopped. Now, I attribute that to a couple of things, one of them being the fact that the Pentagon was attacked, and that is a local attack. And it was a huge attack, and almost everybody in the Washington area knew someone or knew of someone who had perished in that attack. But, of course, the drug usage is right back up now, and we know that there are, this sounds very trivial, but it's not trivial, cigarette smugglers coming up from the southern United States funding Hamas and Hezbollah by selling